Good afternoon, and we are live with another episode of PharSide Pholios. My name is Monica Leek, and I am your host of PharSide Pholios, which is a broadcast from the PharSide Book Club, Coed Book Club, that's based in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And welcome to March Madness, this series of March Madness, as we continue to interview and host some amazing and phenomenal authors during this month, which is also National Reading Month. So go to your library or go to your favorite indie bookstore and pick up a book. And it's also Women's History Month. So let's celebrate the women in our lives who make history every day. So today we have with us another amazing, multi-talented author, Wayne Turmel. Mr. Wayne Turmel is a writer, speaker, and entrepreneur, and he's writing in Las Vegas, Nevada. So he's the author of 9 nonfiction books, which includes The Long Distance Teammate, Stay Engaged and Connected While Working Anywhere, which is definitely relevant for all of those who are working virtually during the last year and a half, 2 years. Also the author of The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership, and Meet Like You Mean It, a leader's guide to painless and productive virtual meetings, and 3 historical fiction novels, The Count of the Sahara, Acre's Bastard, and its sequel, Acre's Orphans. His latest novel, the urban fantasy thriller Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk, debuted November 19th, 2020, and that's the book that we're discussing this afternoon. His motto is, "Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. The rest of us are doomed too, but get a smile smugly and say, 'Told you so.'" All right, so welcome Wayne Turmel to the Far Side.
Good heavens. Thank you, Miss Monica. That. I was listening to that intro going, wow, this guy must be really cool. And then I realized it was me and it's all nonsense. But thank you.
Well, welcome. So glad to have you spend this time with us to talk about this urban fantasy, Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk. Now, chapter one opens with a when answer in the heading, Night of the Full Moon. Night of the Full Moon. So what makes this particular night any different from other nights and sets the stage for what's coming up in the book?
Well, for you and me, not a lot. But I don't know about you. I'm assuming that you are not a werewolf. One of the things, and I, as a writer of a series, I have put myself in a serious hole here. But I wanted to track the kind of the cycle of the moon and how that relates to Johnny. And so one of the weird things about werewolf stories to me was always, I'm a perfectly normal person 27 days of the year, but then one day it's like, oh my gosh, it's the moon. Oh, and you go crazy. And that never made any sense to me. So in my world, when I was writing Johnny, you know, his body clock kind of syncs with the moon. So when the moon is new and he's kind of sluggish and doesn't have any energy and he's kind of like he's got a cold. But as it gets closer and closer to the full moon, it's harder and harder to control his nasty snarling side, which he calls Shaggy. It's hard to keep Shaggy under control the closer it gets to the full moon. And so the book, you can track kind of where he is physically by where the moon is. The problem is I am now on book 3 and I have to keep going back and counting how many days since the last chapter. Nobody told me there would be math involved.
Nobody told you about the math piece. Well, I think as for your readers, those of us who may not, deal with cycles of the moon, they may not worry so much about the exact count. And
you'd be amazed though. People, my beta readers get really cranky. We're going, this is 4 days after, not 5, you moron. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So those are the real, diehards, true blue, to the detail
Well,
person.
Monica, genre readers become really, really, really committed to what they're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
they love what's in their genre, and they take it very seriously. I mean, have you ever talked to a Trekkie?
Yeah, that is
I mean,
very
have you had
serious.
that conversation? And you
That
want to
is
go,
very serious.
just made it all up, right? But people are obsessed, and it's funny um, that they take that stuff very seriously. So as an author, you need to put in the work. You know?
So does that same approach work? You find that same thing being with the details of the historical fiction that you've
Oh,
written?
absolutely. Absolutely. Historical fiction people, one of the very few, I've been very blessed, one of the very few bad reviews I got for Count of the Sahara, the guy said it was because I used a phrase which they didn't use in 1928. And I almost responded. It's the only time I've ever almost responded to a
Mm-hmm.
review, because I actually did my research and they actually did use that phrase. And the phrase I'm paraphrasing is screw the
Mm-hmm.
pooch. They actually used that phrase on army bases in the 20s. And I wanted to correct this guy so badly because his whole reason for giving me a bad review was I had used a phrase 10 years at a time. And people take that stuff very, very seriously. It's one of the wonderful things about historical fiction is it gets people who are obsessed with history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you'd better get it right.
And it gives historical fiction gives you, a little reprieve from, the I guess the exactness of the time, or pulls you in the time with without it being with another story
Yeah.
beyond what you would find in a textbook.
Well, that's
So
the thing, is history is stories. When people tell me that history is boring, I just want to tear my hair out. Because it's stories, it's cool stuff. It's like, how do you not love this? How do you not find it as fascinating as I do? Which apparently they don't. But
well, we are appreciative, I'm sure, your readers, both historical fiction as well as those of urban fantasy, appreciate your attention to detail. This werewolf thing you got going on here. The Russian tasted like borscht and cheap cigarettes. I mean, that gives you, there's a visual right there if you've ever had borscht and then you've ever been around cheap cigarettes. And the quote says, well, his blood did. It's not like I actually ate him. I wasn't that far gone. So if that narrator wasn't that far gone, then where was he?
well, see, this is part of the thing, is that it's the full moon and the book opens. I'm very proud of this. The book opens in the middle of a fight. And so the fight's already going on. And one of the struggles for Johnny, one of the cool things about Johnny as a character, is he has control somewhat of his shaggy side. Growing up, he's learned to control it mostly. It's really hard to control at the full moon. But as the book opens, he's actually burst into these Russian gangsters. The word is blatnoys. There's some more research for you. The Russian word for gangster is blatnoy.
All right, thanks.
He bursts in because he's trying to rescue this young girl who's been kidnapped. And so Johnny he's got to be, he's gone full Shaggy so that he can defeat the bad guys, but he's got to like not eat the victim at the same time. So he's got to have some control. And that battle for control is really the whole theme of the series is, when do you control your baser natures and when do you let them run? Which to me is the whole beauty of the werewolf trope, the whole idea of werewolves. That's why they're my favorite monster.
So is it more about like the struggle between what you can control and versus kind of what is considered the norm as to what you can't control versus what the norm?
Yeah, I think we all have a big hairy rage monster inside of us. And we have spent our whole lives learning to control it and tamp it down. Except in moments when you can't and you don't. And I think maybe because when I was about 13, I was babysitting my cousin and I saw this old Hammer film called Curse of the Werewolf. And because every 13-year-old boy has a raging hormone monster inside of him, that idea really fascinated me. This idea that even the nicest guys have this thing inside them.
So with Johnny, how does that kind of evolve throughout the story where he's dealing with this struggle of who he is as the person, and then this becoming that happens just, it's not a daily thing, it's not an everything, but it's in a cycle where this other part of who he is shows up.
Yeah, Johnny, I really like this character. I think he's nice and complicated, but on top of it all, he's a nice guy. Johnny was adopted in the late 80s from Romania when, adopting Romanian orphans was a thing that people did, right? Because people could get white babies with no paperwork is essentially what was going on. And so his parents adopted this kid from Romania and then found out that there were issues. As a kid, they would have been behavioral problems, and they put him on Ritalin because they thought he was, ADD, and they treated him like he was stupid and all of these things. And so growing up, eventually he's learned to control this sort of kind of, and he has a ton of self-esteem issues, which is probably not something you want in, a 6-foot rage monster. But I think that's part of Johnny's thing, is he's realizing that there is more to him than just this problem. The other thing about Johnny is that in his world, he thinks he's the weirdest thing there is. He doesn't believe in the supernatural. He doesn't believe in, a lot of the urban fantasy stuff that people believe in. He thinks he's the weird one. And as the book goes on, as he deals with the Anubis Disk and various and sundry psychic phenomenon, he realizes maybe the world is weirder than he thought, and he's not as weird as he was always led to believe. So that's Johnny's arc.
So this book, Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk, is, classified as, urban fantasy. So what brought you to fantasy from the nonfiction world? You've had success with topics of leadership, team building, and entrepreneurship. And that seems like such a leap.
Well, it is, but a man's got to do what he's got to do to maintain his sanity. Uh, I started my life out of high school as a creative person. I was a stand-up comedian, did it for a lot of years. And so I was always writing and stuff. And then I got a big boy job and, had to maintain that. But I always had this slightly crazy side of me that was looking for an outlet that wasn't turning into a wolf and howling at the moon. And so I've always had like this bunch of stories that I wanted to tell. And part of the problem is that growing up, I was bibliographically promiscuous, which is a lovely way of saying I was a book slut and would read anything. And so the stories in my head, yes, there are these thrilling adventures in the Crusades, like you get with the Luca Lapu stories. But also there's these crazy werewolf detective stories that kind of rattle around in my head. And the nice thing, I guess, about not having a publisher and a big old book contract is I can write anything I want. I mean, I worried about switching genre. I worried about switching genres because I had written 3 historical fiction books and was starting to get a little bit of a reputation in those circles. But then, what am I going to do? Tick off both my readers?
So so you've got this nonfiction realm that you've written in. You've had, some historical fiction. Now you've got some urban fiction, urban fantasy under your belt. So does that mean there are other genres that you're willing to stick your foot into?
I suppose, although the second in the Johnny Lycan series, the second book comes out in December, and I am well into the third book. So there's at least a couple more of those bad boys coming before I go somewhere else. But I have ideas. My brain, the Geico commercial where the squirrels are chasing each other around the pool and they just go, squirrels are back. It's kind of like that. The squirrels are busy, so who knows what the next thing will be. But there are at least a couple of more Johnny Lycan books coming.
Okay, so for those who are watching us live, and then again for those who are catching the replay, we are here today with Wayne Turmel, and he is talking about his wonderful urban fantasy book, Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk, which is book 1 of the series. Book 2 will come out in the fall, December, you said December timeframe?
December 8th, yeah.
Of 2022. So that means you might want to get a head start and pick up book 1 and read now, so you're ready for book 2 when it comes out. And it's a wonderful read, and we're learning a lot about Mr. Turmel right here and his writing.
You're sorry you asked, haven't you? You're sorry you asked right now, aren't you?
We were learning so much about Mr. Turmel and his wonderful writing and his great expanse of just reaching across genres and willingness and gumption to jump across genres, try something new. And he's got stories in his head. So if someone's got stories in their head, pretty much you can bank on it that there'll be more stories to come, and it's not a one and done type thing. So for our listeners and viewers, definitely you want to pick book 1, Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk of this series, and then check out some of his historical fiction as well. Wayne, what are maybe 1 or 2 lessons that you hope that readers might pick up or think about from Johnny's story?
I think there's a couple of things. I don't know that This qualifies as PBS exactly. It's not exactly educational reading, and yet I think you can learn something from everything. I think one of the things is I'm a real skeptic about the whole supernatural thing. I don't believe it. I was raised around it as a kid, and I think most of it is nonsense. And yet, as the bard said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophy, Horatio. And so, you need to be open to what the world has. The other thing, and this is true of every single protagonist in every single one of my books. So if I had a therapist, she would tell me that there's a theme here. Is the whole notion of you are enough. That no matter your circumstances, no matter where you're placed, you are smarter than you think you are. You can rely on yourself more than you have been led to believe, and not to believe those who try to diminish you. And I was about halfway through book 2 of the Johnny series before I realized that almost every book I've written is essentially the same theme. So somebody's trying to tell me something.
So with that in mind, as having that kind of theme within your stories, what has that writing process? What is your writing process like? How has that journey evolved from maybe that first book that you got out to where you are now, having a historical fiction series, now an urban fantasy series, and you've written all of this nonfiction. So what has that writing journey
process been like? I wish there was some really, really brilliant way of synopsizing the mess that is my writing style, but I think ultimately my writing process hasn't changed since high school. And here's what I mean by that. When I was in high school, I had a job cooking in a fried chicken restaurant. And, there's some late nights and I got to get my homework done and whatever. And what I found was when I was doing something mindless like washing pots, I would write my essays in my head until I had them just about right. And then I would come home and very quickly get it down on the paper. And I still write that way. Like, I will take, during the week, I'll take my notebook. Matter of fact, this is my notebook. This was yesterday's adventure out on the deck. And noodle and think and plot. And I do it in kind of 3 chapter chunks.
Mm-hmm.
But I noodle on it and think about it, and I don't actually do any writing. And then the weekend comes and I sit down and it just all pours out, and I'll do thousands of words in a sitting. And my brain still kind of operates that way. That's why my first drafts, and I know all writers say this and they're almost always wrong, my first drafts are actually pretty good because I've edited and tweaked it and, just kind of channeled it onto the page. And it doesn't mean that I don't need editing, and it doesn't mean that I don't need to rewrite and all of that. But they're pretty solid in terms of plot and connection and all of that kind of thing. So I process it all mentally before I put it on the page.
So
yeah, go ahead. So the rest of you just try that. Just go for that. Anybody can do it, right?
So for all of we're a book club. There are book clubs that watch us and join in, and our book club members are watch it and they catch the replay. So you have a lot of people who, during this time frame where we were kind of locked in or quarantined or shut in or whatever, who felt like, what, I would love to write. That's something on my bucket list, or something I would like to do. I'd like to write a story. I'd like to, contribute to an anthology.
Basically, everybody who didn't learn to make sourdough bread tried to write a book. Is kind of how that worked.
So, I mean, what is some sage advice you could give to those who are aspiring to go through this journey of writing and publishing?
I think the big thing is to share it with other people. And I don't mean show your spouse, I don't mean show it to your mom. I mean, find a writer's group or a readers group, and you can find them online, you can find them in person. There are a number here in Las Vegas. I love the writing scene here in Vegas. But you got to talk to other writers, and you've got to let other writers see what you do, and you need to read their stuff. There's this notion that writing is a very solitary business. And
Mhm.
no, typing is solitary. Writing is actually social. You want to interact with other people and you want to get their feedback. My wife is a lovely woman and all of that, but she doesn't read anything until the first draft is completely done. But there are probably 8 or 10 people that have had their fingerprints on it before it reaches that stage. And so find a writer's group, read other writers' work, practice giving feedback, practice getting feedback. Taking
Mhm.
feedback is a skill, and it's not always easy. But I think that makes you a better writer.
Most definitely. So this is a reminder to those aspiring writers, that it doesn't hurt to go beyond your immediate circle to find those persons to read your writing. I mean, that's branching out to audiences, that's accepting, some constructive criticism. You'll find out what needs development. You might find out something that you might have missed, a detail that you might have missed when somebody else's eyes are able to take a glance at your work.
It also, it's funny, there are genre specific groups, to be sure, right? Romance writers, horror writers, there are science fiction. There are genre specific uh, groups. I like both the groups that I belong to are non genre specific. And I think that's really valuable because you're not breathing your own exhaust all the time. Like if all you do is read to other science fiction writers, you will probably not connect with people who don't read science fiction because you're so busy making the science fiction writers happy. Um, but the fact that I've been made to write or read romance and science fiction and memoir and all of these things has exposed it so that when Johnny has a love scene or Johnny has to do something that is outside of just the werewolf thing, it helps me write it better. Who said that? Who is this person? Love werewolves more than vampires. Yes, I totally agree with you. I'm so glad you're here. I think vampires used to be cool, and I'm not going to blame Stephanie Myers for this because the decooling of vampires started long before then. But I think that here's the thing: vampires are outside; they're seductive. They lure you in, right? The thing about a werewolf is that the horror is inside. The calls are coming from inside the house. The scary stuff is inside of you. What makes me crazy, just like they decooled vampires, right? They're trying to do that with werewolves. If you go into Amazon and you look up shapeshifter, especially shapeshifter romance, and I hope that who's the nice lady? She's just with the book club. She doesn't have a name. Help me.
Lana.
Lana. Okay, Lana. If you go into Amazon, you look at shapeshifter romance. It's all of these incredibly beautiful people, and the guys don't have a single body hair on them. It's like you're a werewolf, for corn's sake. Like, Johnny is actually hairy. People tease him all the time because his chest and his arms and stuff are really hairy. It's like the guy on the cover of the Shifter novel, like he waxes every 28 days or something. I don't know. So yes, werewolves are way cooler than vampires. Thank you. I agree with you. They're big, high 10.
Wow. So with all of your writing, what is something that you've learned about yourself through writing this particular series about Johnny?
Can't be left unsupervised. What have I learned about myself? I don't know. I think it confirmed a lot of things. What I like about Johnny is because it's in modern times, there's a bunch of stuff that you can do that you can't do necessarily when you write historical fiction. The humor is very different. I mean, Johnny can just do a good old-fashioned poop joke if he wants, because it's perfectly fitting with the time and the character. And of course, my background as a comic, the jokes come whether I like them or not. So a big part of it is editing, not writing every silly thing that comes into my head. But I think that this has really kind of freed me up in a lot of ways to look at the world. My daughter is Johnny's age. She's a little younger than Johnny would be. And so I'm trying not to write this as the crusty old white guy that I am. I'm trying to, consider myself a 30-year-old who lives in the city of Chicago. And what does the world look like? And what do you talk like? And what do you, what are your references and those kinds of things? And so it's forcing me to get outside of my head.
Now, how can our viewers purchase this book, this lovely book, and connect with you on social media?
In huge quantities. They should purchase the book in huge quantities. Buy copies and copies and copies and send them to your friends. You've had enough authors on here. You know as well as I do that the answer is go to Amazon. You can go to my Amazon page. If you go to the Amazon page for Wayne Turmel, and you can see how it's spelled right there. If you look on there, you'll see my fiction and my nonfiction, so you can see the whole breadth of my literary genius. So yeah, you can get Johnny Lycan there. Certainly, you can connect to me through Goodreads. WayneTurmel.com is my website, and I will gladly engage on Twitter. It's just W Turmel. So yeah, absolutely connect with me. I love connecting with readers, and Lana, especially since you are so obviously brilliant and appreciate werewolves more than vampires. Bring it. I'm happy to connect with all of you. I love talking to readers.
Well, I'd like to thank my guest today, Mr. Wayne Turmel, for spending this afternoon with me and our lovely live and replay viewing audience. And Mr. Turmel, we wish you continued success with Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk. We will be looking forward to book 2 in the series, which comes out in December. And then the 3rd installment, which will follow. So thank you so much for sharing this time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Everybody, you don't know how much I appreciate, and authors appreciate the chance to get in front of readers. And so thank you, Miss Monica, for having me.
All right. So our special guest today on PharSide Pholios was Mr. Wayne Turmel. Definitely pick up his book, Johnny Lycan and the Anubis Disk. And this is book 1. So you want to hit that book 1 now and be ready for book 2, which will be released in December. And definitely go to Amazon to check out not only this urban fantasy series, but his historical fiction series for you historical fiction buffs. So make sure to our audience that you're staying in tune to the PharSide Coed Book Club Facebook page for more author interviews and posts as we celebrate our own version of March Madness with some wonderful, amazing books by authors across the genres. So until next time, many roots, many voices are a part of the infinite story. So plant your seed and have a great and amazing day.